In this landmark case, the Supreme Court of Ghana had occasion to critique the systemic delays that plague the administration of justice, noting with regret that the dispute, concerning a relatively straightforward question of title to a single house, had taken 40 years to resolve, having originated in 1974. The litigation arose when the plaintiff, a senior member of the Osona family of Asamoah Ofinso, acting for the family, sued for a declaration of title, possession, and an injunction over a property numbered 0.1.92 in Kumasi. The controversy centered around whether the property had retained its character as family property or had become self-acquired by one Osehwiri, the deceased person around whom the dispute revolved. According to the plaintiff, the property was originally acquired by Kwabena Amankwa in 1921 and devolved to Hwiri, his customary successor, upon Amankwa's interstate death in 1942. Although Hwiri subsequently acquired a new lease in 1946 and redeveloped the property, the plaintiff argued that he had done so in his fiduciary capacity as successor, and the property thus remained family property. The defendants, beneficiaries under Hwiri's will, contended that the original lease expired in 1942, extinguishing the family's interest, and that the later lease was a fresh personal acquisition by Hwiri, making it his self-acquired property. The litigation meandered through the courts for decades. Judgment was initially reserved by one High Court judge, but delivered years later by another without formally adopting the prior proceedings. A procedural defect that led the Court of Appeal to set aside the decision and order a de novo hearing. Unfortunately, the new trial judge failed again to adopt prior proceedings or take fresh evidence, opting instead to dispose of the case on legal arguments alone, based on an agreement by the parties, which the Supreme Court later condemned as an abdication of judicial responsibility. The appellate court nevertheless reviewed the full record, including the unauthorized proceedings, and found for the plaintiff, prompting the appeal to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, per Wood CJ, upheld the Court of Appeal's decision, but went further to make a landmark pronouncement on the adoption of proceedings. Departing from its own precedent, the court ruled that in civil proceedings, the decision to adopt evidence from a previous judge should no longer be contingent upon the consent of all parties. Rather, it should lie within the discretion of the new judge, who must assess whether such adoption would result in any miscarriage of justice. The court provided criteria for exercising this discretion, including the availability and reliability of witnesses, the nature of the evidence, and the overall effect on judicial economy and fairness. The court decisively moved away from the rigid position in Boama v. Ochere and embraced a more pragmatic, justice-driven approach anchored in Article 129, Clause 3 of the 1992 Constitution. Turning to the substantive legal issue, the court affirmed that Osehwiri, having been the customary successor to Kwabena Amankwa, held a fiduciary duty to the family, and any lease acquired in that capacity, even if in his own name, was held in trust for the family. The mere fact that the original lease was under English law did not sever the family's claim once it had passed to a customary successor. In this respect, the court reiterated that at Ghanaian customary law, property devolving upon a successor remains family property, regardless of how it was first acquired. Citing precedents, the court dismissed the appellant's argument that the new lease created personal property, instead affirming the equitable and fiduciary character of the successor's position. Consequently, the Supreme Court dismissed the appeal, upholding the Court of Appeal's finding that the property remained family property, and rejecting the appellant's claims that Hwiri had acquired a personal interest therein. The respondent's cross-appeal for accounts and additional costs, however, was refused, the court noting that no proper foundation had been laid for such relief. The judgment ultimately stands as a powerful assertion of fiduciary principles under customary law and a significant doctrinal shift in civil procedure regarding the adoption of proceedings.